It's one of the great paradoxes of our modern world. We are awash in economic data, GDP figures, consumer spending numbers, business sentiment surveys, and on and on. The economics profession has more quantitative information than could have been dreamed of a century ago. And yet, our ability to accurately forecast economic conditions and make sense of the numbers often seems trapped in a primitive state. The recent revisions to Japan's GDP data illustrate this paradox perfectly. Government statisticians initially reported that the world's third-largest economy shrank at an annualized 1.8% rate in the first quarter of this year. Not great, but not a complete collapse either. A few weeks later, they revised that contraction to a much sharper 2.9% plunge. That's a big miss on something as fundamental as overall economic output. As the economist Yasuhide Yajima lamented, the revisions came on the late side, calling into question whether Japan's GDP numbers truly reflect the actual state of the economy, as they should. Other advanced nations seem to have an easier time getting more accurate preliminary readings on GDP. For a highly developed economy that prides itself on technological prowess, Japan's data issues are befuddling and more than a bit embarrassing. But it's not just an isolated case of Japan's bureaucrats having a tough time with the numbers. Puzzling and contradictory economic data is popping up all over the globe these days. In the United States, for example, first quarter GDP was initially reported as growing at a sturdy 3.2% annual rate. But more recent figures have knocked that down to a paltry 0.6% crawl, weaker than Japan's revised contraction. If highly paid professional economists working at government agencies with potent statistical modeling capabilities have such a difficult time even getting the most basic GDP figures right on the first pass, what hope is there for accurate economic projections? As the noted historian Will Durant once remarked, to my mind, the product of the economist's strivings is a sort of theological or metaphysical science. And yet, the investing world breathlessly parses every economic data release, with fortunes being made and lost based on knee-jerk reactions to the latest numbers. Just look at the recent convulsions in bond markets sparked by shifting views on whether the Federal Reserve will cut interest rates in the coming months. Does an entire planetary financial system really want to hinge on numbers that have been revised up, down, and all around by the time the next release comes? If the technocrats have such troubles with hard data, it stands to reason that their economic forecasting ability would be even more dismal. Yet monetary policymakers, from the Federal Reserve to the Bank of Japan, continue to set the course for the entire global economy based heavily on their outlooks for GDP, inflation, employment, and the like. Nowhere is this forecasting frenzy more feverish than at the Bank of Japan. Despite the hefty downward revision to first quarter GDP, most analysts cited in news reports still expect the central bank to raise interest rates yet again at its July meeting. Why? Because their forecasting models say the economy will rebound strongly in the current quarter and that business sentiment remains positive. In an age of unparalleled data overload, it seems we have become enslaved to economic predictions of inevitably cloudy reliability. Japan's central bankers will batten down for their rate decision armed with a blizzard of indicators, surveys, historical analyses, and sophisticated computer modeling. But will any of it really give an accurate picture of where their $5 trillion economy is heading over the next few quarters? One can't help but wonder whether the future paths being charted by the BOJ and other central banks are built more on guesswork than empirical certainty. The economic sages of centuries past had to maneuver with far less hard data under their belts. In many ways, their powers of astute observation, historical perspective, and sheer common sense serve them better than the blizzard of misleading data points available today. Take the venerable economic historian Thomas Carlyle, writing back in an age before GDP statistics were even conceived. Reflecting on the great financial bubbles and panics of the early 19th century, he remarked, "In everything, nevertheless, there is a beginning, an epoch when it first stepped across the line of inert non-entity. That seems an uncannily prescient way to frame the buildup of unsustainable financial imbalances that repeatedly destabilize markets and economies, even in our time of supposed data mastery. Looking at today's crosscurrents of conflicting statistics, slowing global growth, mounting debt loads, and untamed asset valuations, Carlyle is worth consulting again. There are things in this world to be worshipped, not satirized, things to be studied, revered, and devoutly valued. Among these, he admonished, are the highest spiritual, celestial, and terrestrial phenomena, which have appeared expressly to this planet and to these generations of human souls. Essentially, we should be revering economic reality as it actually unfolds, not the dubious forecasts that so dominate modern thought and discourse. That's not to say large swaths of data and sophisticated forecasting models have no value whatsoever. We've learned many micro and macroeconomic relationships far better using these modern tools than past generations could have fathomed. But we should never confuse the map for the territory. As with other complex adaptive systems, the economy retains an almost fractal element of chaos and unpredictability however much order we try to impose. No data stream, forecast, or mathematical relationship can tell us everything about the mysterious dance of human action and reaction that is an economy. There will always be randomness, wild cards, and butterfly effects undermining the precision of even our most sophisticated modeling. In many ways, we're back to humbler times of looking for softer signals of fundamental economic conditions. The writings of Carlyle and his contemporaries remind us to watch for the telltale whispers of behavior change, crowd psychology, social trust, and cumulative imbalances. These are what truly foreshadow the great economic pivots, positive or negative. So as Japan's central bankers gather with the latest batch of noisy economic numbers, perhaps they would do well to heed the ancient advice of Lao Tzu. If you realize that all things change, there is nothing you will try to hold on to. The great economic and financial shifts are rarely as abrupt as official statistics indicate, but they are inevitable and ongoing just the same. It's a lesson in epistemic humility that today's data-deluged economists and policymakers could sorely use. The next downturn, whenever it arrives, will doubtless catch most of the numerical forecasts wrong-footed yet again. And the busted models and scrambling bureaucrats will be chasing the data revisions far after the turning point has already passed. Carlyle's words could hardly ring more true. The thing that came unlooked for comes.